Part 1. Doctor had spent 40 years listening to the sounds of the galaxy. She was which meant she studied how different alien species thought and felt. She worked for the Galactic Joy Network aboard their research vessel, the Resonance. Her job was to find sounds that could help heal people who had been hurt by war, disaster, or loss. In her long career, she had recorded many strange and beautiful things. She had captured the singing of creatures made of living crystal on a world at the edge of known space. She had documented the deep humming of beings who lived inside gas giants, their voices so low that most species could not hear them at all. She had even traveled to a dying star to record the last sounds of a civilization that had existed for 1 million years before fading into silence. Was good at her work, she had helped save many lives, but she carried her own wounds too. 20 years ago, she had witnessed something terrible on a world called. She had been there when the peace talks failed. She had seen what happened next. The memories never left her. They lived in her mind like shadows, always present, always cold. The Galactic Joy Network existed because of events like 300 years ago, the Silence Wars had torn through the galaxy. Entire civilizations had collapsed. Billions of beings had died, and billions more had survived with broken minds and wounded spirits. The Joy Network was created to help them heal. They broadcast calming sounds and therapeutic frequencies to traumatized populations across hundreds of worlds. It was important work, but it was also frustrating. No matter how hard they tried, their success rate stayed stuck at around 40%. They could help some people, but not enough. Never enough. Thought about this often as she went about her duties. She wondered if there was something they were missing, some sound or frequency that could reach the beings who could not be reached by anything else. She had searched for it her whole career without success. Then the humans arrived. Humanity had only recently joined the galactic community. They were a young species from a small blue world on the far edge of the galaxy. Most other species did not think much of them. Humans were not especially strong or fast or long-lived. They did not have natural weapons or armor. They could not survive in extreme environments without help from technology. In many ways, they seemed unremarkable. But they were friendly, and they were curious, and they had asked to learn more about the Galactic Joy Network's work. So an ambassador named Sarah had been invited to visit the Resonance for a diplomatic meeting. She brought her husband David and their infant daughter Lily, who was 7 months old. Did not know much about human children. She had never spent time around one before. She was not sure what to expect. The meeting began normally enough. The diplomats gathered around a long table in the conference room. There were 12 beings present, representing 8 different species. Sat near the end of the table, taking notes on her data pad. The human ambassador spoke well. She explained her government's interest in the Joy Network and asked thoughtful questions about their methods. Found herself impressed. Perhaps humans were more capable than they appeared. Then the baby made a sound. Lily had been sitting quietly in her father's lap, chewing on a soft toy. But now she looked up at her mother and made a strange noise. It was a rapid, rhythmic vocalization, high-pitched and musical. The baby's face was split by a wide, toothless smile. Her eyes crinkled with obvious pleasure. The sound came again, louder this time, and kept going. Realized the baby was laughing. She had heard laughter before, of course. Many species had something similar, but this was different. This sound hit her like a wave of warm water. Her neural implant registered something impossible. Her stress hormones were dropping rapidly. The constant low-level anxiety she had carried since was suddenly, inexplicably quiet. For the first time in 20 years, her mind felt still. She looked around the table. Everyone had stopped talking. A warrior named was sitting perfectly motionless. His species was known for being tough and stoic. They were warriors who lived for battle, but his compound eyes were wet with tears. His mandibles trembled. Next to him, a diplomat had closed all 4 of her eyes. Her normally pale blue skin had flushed to a deep purple, a sign of intense emotion in her species. She was smiling, something had never seen her do. An engineer, a being made of living metal, had stopped mid-sentence. His surface was rippling in patterns that's translator identified as profound contentment. Even the ship's AI, whose avatar was projected at the far end of the table, seemed affected. Its normally precise geometric form had softened into flowing curves. The baby laughed again, delighted by all the strange faces staring at her. The ambassador noticed everyone's reaction. She looked confused and a little worried. She apologized for the interruption and tried to quiet her daughter, but held up a hand to stop her. Something important had just happened. She did not understand it yet, but she knew she needed to. After the meeting requested permission to study the phenomenon. The ambassador agreed, curious about what had affected the diplomats so strongly. Over the next several days, recorded Lily laughing at various things. The baby found many things funny. She laughed when her father made faces at her. She laughed when her mother played peekaboo. She laughed at a small mechanical toy that walked in circles on the table. She even laughed at herself, apparently finding the scientist's long blue tentacles amusing. Every time the baby laughed, felt the same effect. The shadows in her mind retreated. The cold weight on her spirit lifted, and her instruments confirmed that this was not just her imagination. The sound was triggering measurable changes in her brain chemistry. Her neural implant recorded drops in stress hormones and increases in the chemicals associated with happiness and peace. She tested the recordings on other crew members. The results were the same. A technician who had lost his family in a reactor accident began to smile for the first time in years. A pilot who suffered from battle trauma reported that her nightmares had stopped. Even beings whose psychology was completely different from showed positive responses. This made no sense. Sound therapy was species-specific. What worked for one type of brain usually did nothing for another. The Joy Network had spent centuries developing different treatments for different species, but human infant laughter seemed to work on everyone. Analyzed the recordings again and again. She studied the frequencies, the patterns, the subtle variations in pitch and rhythm. Slowly, she began to understand what was happening. Human bobbies laughed on frequencies that bypassed cognitive defenses entirely. Most therapeutic sounds worked by reaching the thinking parts of the brain and slowly changing how they processed emotions. But baby laughter went somewhere deeper. It reached the oldest and most basic parts of the neural architecture, the parts that existed before thought, before language, before fear. It reminded the brain of safety and warmth and connection. It told the wounded mind that the world was not all darkness and pain, that joy was still possible. And because this effect operated at such a fundamental level, it worked across species. The details of brain structure did not matter. Every sapient species in the galaxy had these basic systems, buried deep beneath their higher functions. Human baby laughter reached all of them. Brought her findings to the Joy Network's leadership. They were skeptical at first. The idea seemed too simple, too strange, but the data was undeniable. They agreed to run more tests. The tests confirmed everything. Human infant laughter was the most effective therapeutic sound ever discovered. It could potentially help billions of beings who had never responded to any other treatment. But there was a problem, a significant one. Bobbies could not laugh on command. Their laughter was genuine, spontaneous, unpredictable. It could not be manufactured or faked. If the Joy Network wanted to use this discovery, they would need real human bobbies, laughing real laughs for real reasons. They would need volunteers. The question now was whether any human parents would answer the call. Part 2. The call went out across Earth. The Galactic Joy Network needed human families, specifically parents with bobbies between 3 months and 2 years old. They were asking these families to relocate to space, to live aboard an orbital research station, to let their children's laughter be recorded and broadcast to wounded worlds across the galaxy. The compensation was generous. Each family would receive enough credits to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, But money was not really what the Joy Network was asking for. They were asking for something much harder to give. They needed real happiness, genuine joy, captured in its most innocent form. They needed Bobbies who laughed because they were truly delighted by the world around them. That kind of thing could not be bought. Many people were skeptical. Some thought it was a scam. Others worried about the safety of sending human children into space. A few religious groups objected on spiritual grounds, claiming that alien technology should not be allowed to capture and transmit human souls. News programs debated the ethics of using Bobbies for medical research, even research that caused them no harm. But some people understood what was really being asked. They understood because they knew what trauma felt like. They knew what it meant to carry wounds that would not heal, to live with shadows that never lifted. They knew how much they would have given once for anything that could help. Maya was one of these people. Maya was 34 years old. She worked as a nurse at a hospital in San Francisco. She had a husband named James, a software engineer who built programs that helped coordinate disaster relief. They had met at a volunteer center after an earthquake and fallen in love while sorting medical supplies. Their daughter Lily was now 8 months old, and she was the happiest baby Maya had ever known. Lily laughed at everything. She laughed at peekaboo, at funny faces at her own feet. She laughed at the family dog, a patient old retriever named Murphy who tolerated the baby grabbing his ears with remarkable grace. She laughed at the morning sunlight coming through the window. She laughed at the sound of rain on the roof. She seemed to find the entire universe endlessly amusing, and her delight was contagious. Even on Maya's hardest days, Lily's laughter made things better. Maya understood the value of this better than most people. Her own mother had been a refugee. She had fled her homeland as a young woman, escaping war and violence that Maya could barely imagine. Had spent 2 years in a refugee camp before finally reaching safety. She had built a new life, married, raised a daughter, but she had never really healed. The shadows of those years stayed with her until the day she died. Maya remembered her mother's eyes, the way they sometimes went distant and cold. She remembered the nightmares that made cry out in the middle of the night. She remembered the way her mother flinched at loud noises, even decades later, even in the safety of her own home. Had been a wonderful mother despite everything she carried. But Maya had always wished there was something that could have helped her, something that could have lifted the weight. Now there might be, not for who had passed away 3 years ago, but for others like her, millions of others, billions of others spread across the galaxy. Maya talked to James about it. They discussed it for 3 days, going over every concern, every fear, every possible consequence. The space station was supposed to be safe. The Bobbies would not be experimented on or harmed in any way. They would just be allowed to be Bobbies, to play and laugh and be happy, while recording equipment captured the sounds they made. It was strange to think about, but it was not dangerous. In the end, the decision was not really that hard. If Lily's laughter could heal others the way it healed Maya every morning, then maybe this was their purpose. Maybe this was why Lily had come into the world with such an extraordinary capacity for joy. They applied to the program. 3 weeks later, they were on a shuttle heading to orbit. The resonance had been transformed. The research vessel was now essentially a floating nursery. 32 Bobbies from 19 countries had been selected, along with their families. The ship's cold metal corridors had been softened with warm colors and soft surfaces. There were play areas filled with toys, sleeping quarters designed for comfort, and medical facilities staffed by doctors from a dozen different species who had learned everything they could about human infant care. Maya met the other families during the first week. There were parents from Japan and Brazil, from Nigeria and Sweden, from India and Egypt and a dozen other places. They came from different cultures and spoke different languages, but they had all answered the same call. Many of them had stories like Maya's. They knew what trauma looked like. They wanted to help. The Bobbies, of course, did not care about any of this. They were too young to understand what they were doing or why. They just wanted to play and eat and sleep and explore. And laugh. They laughed constantly, filling the ship with a sound that made even the most stoic crew members smile. Doctor oversaw the recording process. She had become fascinated by the bobbies, watching them with her large silver eyes as they discovered the world around them. The equipment she used was incredibly sensitive, capable of capturing sounds that most species could not hear at all. She learned to isolate the precise frequencies that made baby laughter so effective, to layer them with carrier waves that could survive transmission across light years of space. The first broadcast went to a world called Seven. It was a small planet in a distant system, home to a species called the... They were gentle beings, artists and philosophers who had once been known for their beautiful music. But 10 years ago, their world had been attacked with a terrible weapon. A biological agent had been released into their atmosphere, something that caused intense fear and despair in anyone who breathed it. The attack had lasted only a few hours, but the psychological damage was permanent. Most of the survivors had become catatonic, trapped in a prison of endless terror inside their own minds. Nothing had helped them. The Joy Network had tried everything. Now they tried something new. The recording was broadcast through a network of relay stations, crossing hundreds of light years in seconds. It reached Seven and was played through speakers in the medical facilities where the survivors were kept. No one expected much. They had not responded to anything else. But within a day, something changed. A few of the patients began to move. Their eyes focused for the first time in years. They looked around as if waking from a long sleep. Within a week, they began to speak. The news spread quickly. The Joy Network had found something that actually worked. Human baby laughter could reach beings that nothing else could reach. The broadcasts expanded to other worlds, other species, other survivors of other tragedies. The results were not always as dramatic as Seven, but they were always positive. People who had given up hope began to hope again. But success brought problems. The Mercantile Syndicate was a coalition of wealthy species who controlled much of the galactic economy. They saw the broadcasts as a business opportunity. They wanted exclusive rights to the recordings. They offered enormous sums of money and made subtle threats about what might happen if their offer was refused. The Purist Coalition was a group of species who believed in keeping cultures separate. They declared that human sound contamination was an act of cultural warfare, an attempt to impose alien influence on vulnerable populations. They demanded that the broadcasts be stopped. And somewhere in the outer reaches of known space, something else had noticed the signals. A species called the Hollow, beings who fed on despair and suffering, had grown fat on the aftermath of the Silence Wars. The Joy Network's broadcasts were starving them. They began to move toward the signal's source. Maya knew none of this. She just knew that Lily was happy, that they were helping people, and that for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not know that something was coming, something that wanted the laughter to stop. Part 3. The Hollow arrived on the day of Lily's first birthday. Maya had spent the morning decorating the family quarters with colorful streamers and balloons. The other families on the residence had gathered to celebrate, bringing gifts and treats from their home countries. Lily did not understand what a birthday was, of course. She was only 1 year old, but she understood that there were many people paying attention to her, and that there were balloons, and that balloons were hilarious. She had been laughing all morning. Then the alarm started. Doctor was on the bridge when the sensors detected the approaching ships. There were dozens of them, strange vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They were completely black, so dark that they looked like holes in space itself. The ship's computer could barely track them. Knew what they were immediately. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Hollow. No one was sure where the Hollow had come from. Some said they were an artificial species, created long ago by a civilization that wanted to weaponize despair. Others said they were natural creatures, evolved in some dark corner of the universe where suffering was the only source of energy. Whatever their origin, they fed on negative emotions. Fear, grief, pain, hopelessness. These things were food to them, and they had been feeding well for a very long time. The Silence Wars had been a feast. Millions of worlds had been devastated, billions of beings traumatized. The Hollow had grown powerful on all that suffering. They had lurked in the shadows ever since, feeding on the wounds that would not heal. But now those wounds were healing. The Joy Network's broadcasts, powered by human baby laughter, were spreading hope across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Hollow were hungry, and they had traced the signal to its source. The captain of the Resonance ordered an immediate jump to hyperspace. But before the engines could activate, the Hollow ships deployed something. A wave of energy washed over the vessel, and suddenly everything went quiet. It was a dampening field. Had heard of these but never experienced one. The Hollow used them to suppress positive emotions, to create an environment where only despair could thrive. Inside the field, joy itself became almost impossible to feel. In the nursery, the Bobbies began to cry. Maya held Lily close, feeling the change wash over her. It was like a cold weight settling on her chest. The happy decorations suddenly looked garish and false. The streamers seemed to mock her. What was the point of celebrating? What was the point of anything? Her mother was dead. The universe was full of suffering. Nothing they did would ever really matter. She recognized these thoughts. They were the shadows that had haunted her mother for decades. They were the same shadows she had fought her whole life. But now they felt overwhelming, irresistible true. Lily was crying. All the Bobbies were crying. Their parents tried to comfort them, but the dampening field made comfort feel hollow. The Hollow ships moved closer. On the bridge, struggled to think through the despair pressing on her mind. The recorded broadcasts would not work. The dampening field blocked transmitted sound. They could not call for help. They could not run. The Hollow would board the ship and then they would feed. Unless the dampening field suppressed recorded and transmitted sound, but it could not stop a live source. If they could broadcast directly, in real time, simultaneously across every Joy Network relay in the galaxy, the signal would be too powerful to block. It would reach everywhere at once, not just to the wounded worlds they had been treating, but to everyone. Every being in the galaxy would hear it. But the power requirements would be enormous. It would burn out their transmission systems completely. They would have one shot, one broadcast, and then nothing. Made her way to the nursery. The parents looked up at her with hollow eyes, their children wailing in their arms. She explained what she needed them to do. It sounded impossible. How could they make their Bobbies laugh when despair was pressing down on them so heavily? How could they find joy when joy itself had been stolen? But Maya understood something about joy that the Hollow did not. Joy was not just a feeling, it was a choice. It was something you created even when everything told you not to. Her mother had taught her that, had survived a refugee camp. She had carried her shadows her whole life, but she had also laughed with Maya. She had found moments of happiness despite everything. She had chosen joy again and again, even when it was hard. Maya looked at her daughter. Lily was crying, her small face red and wet, but she was also looking at her mother, waiting, trusting. Bobbies did not know about despair. They only knew what was in front of them, and what was in front of Lily right now was her mother's face. Maya made a funny face. She stuck out her tongue and crossed her eyes. It was the silliest thing she could think of. She felt ridiculous doing it. The despair in her mind told her it was pointless, that nothing mattered, that she should just give up. But Lily blinked, her crying stuttered, and then, incredibly, impossibly, she giggled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it was enough. Maya felt a tiny crack in the cold weight on her heart. She made another face. Lily giggled again. The other parents saw what she was doing. One by one, they began to try. A father from Brazil blew raspberries on his son's belly. A mother from Japan played peekaboo with her daughter. A father from Nigeria bounced his twins on his knees. It was hard. The despair fought back, but they kept trying. More giggles, more cracks in the darkness. On the bridge, watched her instruments. The bobbies were starting to laugh. It was not much, not yet, but it was something. She began routing power to the transmission array. They would have one chance. Lily found a pot and a wooden spoon. She had discovered weeks ago that banging them together made a wonderful noise. She did it now, laughing at the sound, laughing at the faces around her, laughing because despite everything, laughing was what she did best. The other bobbies joined in. Their laughter mixed together, filling the nursery with sound. It was chaotic and silly and completely defiant. The dampening field pressed down on them, but they kept laughing anyway. Activated the transmission. The broadcast hit every relay in the galaxy simultaneously. It was the most powerful signal the Joy Network had ever sent. It reached worlds that had been treating wounded survivors. It reached worlds that had never heard of the Joy Network at all. It reached the hollow fleet surrounding the resonance. And it reached into places that had been dark for a very long time. On 7, the survivors who had started to recover heard the broadcast and began to sing for the first time in years. Their voices joined the laughter, creating something new, something that had never existed before. On 1,000 wounded worlds, beings who had given up hope looked up and felt something warm touch their minds. They did not understand what it was. They did not need to. They just knew that for one moment the shadows lifted. The hollow felt it too. They were creatures of despair. They had existed by feeding on suffering. They had never experienced anything else. But now, as the broadcast washed over them, they felt something they did not recognize. It was warm and bright and overwhelming. It filled the empty spaces inside them where hunger had always lived. For one impossible moment, they felt joy. It did not transform them completely. They were too old, too set in their nature, but it changed something. It showed them that there was more to existence than what they had always known. It gave them a choice they had never had before. The hollow fleet. They did not attack, did not feed, did not destroy. They simply turned and flew away into the darkness between stars. They would struggle with this new sensation for generations, unsure what to do with something that did not hurt. On the resonance, the dampening field collapsed. The parents held their bobbies close, tears streaming down their faces. But they were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of joy. Looked at her instruments. The transmission array was completely burned out just as she had predicted. They would not be able to broadcast again for months, but it did not matter. They had done what they needed to do. News of what happened spread quickly. The story of the bobbies who had laughed in the face of the hollow became famous across the galaxy. The Galactic Joy Network received thousands of new applications from human families who wanted to help. The broadcasts continued, reaching more worlds, healing more wounds. Maya stayed on the resonance for another 2 years. She watched Lily grow from a baby into a toddler, still laughing at everything, still finding the universe endlessly funny. Eventually, they returned to Earth. Lily started school. She made friends. She learned to read and write. She became a normal human child in most ways, though she always seemed to laugh more than others. Maya never told Lily the full story of what had happened that day. She figured there would be time for that when Lily was older. For now, it was enough that her daughter was happy. It was enough that she had helped. Sometimes, late at night, Maya would think about her mother. She would think about the shadows had carried and the joy she had chosen despite them. She would think about all the beings across the galaxy who were still healing, still learning to hope again. And she would smile. Somewhere in the galaxy, on a world Maya had never seen, a being was hearing human baby laughter for the first time. They did not know where it came from. They did not know about the resonance or the hollow or a little girl named Lily who thought the universe was hilarious. But they knew suddenly that the darkness was not everything, that there was warmth in the world, that joy was possible even after everything. It was enough.